You've got a little something on your hands here. Just all over. Looking at the history of speaking on Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals in my past catalogue of videos, you'd be forgiven to think that I'm not generally a fan of his work. I mean, I think the only Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals I've really spoken about on the channel are Cinderella, which I did not like, and the Cats movie. But actually, I have a really strong affinity for a lot of his earlier work. Evita is probably one of my favourite musicals of all time, and I wish I could have actually seen the Regent's Park open-air production of that. And I have a long history with Jesus Christ Superstar. I directed a production of it when I was 17. It was not good, but we move on. I got better as I directed more. It's all part of the growing process. But it's very funny, despite really enjoying Jesus Christ Superstar, I had never actually seen a production of it live. I kept missing this production. I missed it at Regent's Park, I missed it at Barbican, I missed it at Barbican again, and now it's on a UK tour, and I was not missing it this time. Thankfully, it booked a full week at the New Wimbledon Theatre, so I checked it out there. So, what are my thoughts on this bold revival of Jesus Christ Superstar? What's my opinion on the show as a whole? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, I am Ellie. I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do whatever silly ideas come into my mind, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's dive into Jesus Christ Superstar. Do you think you are what they say you are? Now, if you are somehow unfamiliar with Jesus Christ Superstar, this is the story of Jesus' death. This production, taking it from Judas' perspective through that final week of Jesus' life. We get the destruction of the temple, we get Hosanna, we get all of these different moments leading up to the Last Supper, Jesus' arrest, and eventually the crucifixion. This is what I would dub a bold revival. I think it is less that than some of the more controversial ones like Oklahoma and Sunset Boulevard, but still, I think there's a lot of really interesting ideas here within the staging that allow for a more bold take on the story. And as I said before, I will always have more appreciation for a revival that's trying new things and maybe everything doesn't work, than a revival that just brings back the same show again. Because I think this is how theatre continues, how it molds, and how it evolves. And because of that, I think it's fine if not every idea works. As long as it has that interesting approach and that drive to do something different with the material. I don't think everything clicks with me with this new version of Jesus Christ Superstar. Some of it are my issues with the base material in general, and some of it are due to the approach that they take. I'll discuss now my general problems with Jesus Christ Superstar and where I think it actually does succeed. Because on the whole, when you ask me my opinion on this musical, it is generally positive. But I think it's very clear when you watch the musical as a whole that it was originally envisioned as a concept album. Especially in the first act, I feel like this is an issue that they do resolve a little bit more in the second act. The first act feels very disconnected song to song to song. It spans 4 different days and 4 very conflicting events within Jesus' life, within his last week of life. And the musical doesn't really have time to set up many of these characters. A lot of them are barely even named. So if you don't really know the actual story of Jesus' final week, I feel like it's very easy to get a bit lost. Of course, I went to Catholic school. Can't you tell by looking at me? I'm not someone who is overly religious in general, but I have that background of religious teachings, and I know the story in general. And also, I know the musical myself, and even I found myself feeling like a certain disconnect to this material watching it here. I think the moment that this becomes a little bit tighter is when you get into the Last Supper, because I think those events have a stronger narrative running through. Jesus has his final meal, and then he goes to Gethsemane, and then he gets arrested, and then he gets put on trial, and then he gets sent to Herod. There's a stronger running line of events, a more domino effect, rather than in Act 1 where it's Jesus goes and sings Hosanna. Jesus goes to the temple. Jesus meets Symeon. These are very separate events that read okay in the Bible because they are separated as such. But when you try and put them together, it doesn't flow as well as it possibly could. I think on their own, however, all of these songs are great. And I'll speak about them more in detail when I start speaking about the actual music of this show. But I think when you're putting these really great songs together, especially in Act 1, it does have a couple of structural issues. And I think it very much benefits knowing, I was about to say the gist, but I think knowing the full details of the Easter story. I think one of the things that I love about the show is how it refocuses onto Judas. And because of that, the main focus and the main heart and the main reason for this show is Judas's perspective. I think it really does a great job at humanizing him, giving you his motivations, why he did it, and also how much it tears him up inside that he had to do it. Even after he's given up Jesus, you feel the impact of that decision. However, I think due to some of the direction and performance of the role in Judas in this show, I feel like some of that is lost in this production. This show very much hinges on Judas, and yet this version of Judas feels a little bit more disconnected to what's happening. I feel like in a lot of the direction, we don't see Judas. We lose that perspective a little bit more. While we're watching songs like The Destruction of the Temple, we don't really see Judas there all that much. The moments where we do, I feel like it really works. So there is a moment in Hosanna where we see Mary Magdalene refuse to hold Judas's hand. We see him kind of tear away from the group, a little bit of conflict within there. I think even earlier than that, the conflicts between him and Mary Magdalene are very thorough through this show, and show a clear rift within Jesus' thinking and Judas's thinking. But without him looking over a lot of these events, I feel like you lose out on a lot of the reason of why he gives up Jesus. I think that's the whole reason that we get this first act. Despite its structural issues, it is important because each of these events give you another reason on top of Judas's decision making. This whole show is about Judas's decision and the consequences of that, especially on someone that Judas does very clearly love. I also think there are some performance issues with this, and I'll speak about that when I speak about the cast. As I said, Act 2 is where the ball really gets rolling. It's about the consequences that land on Jesus from there. You get the song Gethsemane, where you really get a moment to dive into Jesus' psyche and how much it weighs on him knowing that he's going to die. Weighing up that responsibility, almost begging for it to be taken away from him. I think there are some really fantastic lines in here that really bring that feeling down. Take this cup away from me because I don't want to taste its poison. Feel it burn me. There's such violent language within that. It's so telling. And I think this production does a great job at exploring that through its direction and story. I think that's where this production shines. In that side of it, in the brutality, and in a lot of its design choices, which really ground it, which I'll speak about a little bit later. But let's move on to the music. As I said, when you put this all together, I feel like it does have some structural issues, but taking each song as its own moment, I think this score and the lyrics of Jesus Christ Superstar are some of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's best work. Heaven on Their Minds is a great rocky opening. It's fantastic, it's rocky, but it also gives you that really, really clear introduction to Judas and his dilemma. How he feels about the way that Jesus is going. The reaffirmation that yes, he does believe in this cause. He does really believe in it, but he doesn't believe in the way that it's going. There's a lot of fear and anxiety that you're really introduced to within this song that is so important to setting up this whole story. I love this Jesus Must Die. Less so for its place in the plot, but just because it absolutely slaps. I love in this production how they have their long sticks that turn around into microphones. And when the beat changes, when they go into what then to do about Jesus of Nazareth, is when they go into a more rockier tone with these sticks and singing directly into the mics. I also love the contrast of how this song starts as well. It's a very clear change from the tone that we've had in the previous songs, really giving a stern and dramatic introduction to the high priests. I think this musical has some of Andrew Lloyd Webber's greatest ballads ever. I Don't Know How to Love Him is such a touching, sweet, soft moment. Really diving into the perspective of Mary Magdalene, a perspective that you don't often get to see, especially in the Bible, where she is kind of pushed a bit more to the side. There's so many great songs in this show. You have Hosanna, you have Blood Money, which is just so rocky. Gethsemane is so iconic for a reason. It's a very powerful moment and a great moment to show the humanity in Jesus. I think that human side is very important. As someone who isn't overly religious but has studied Christianity and particularly the Catholic perspective on this, Jesus is someone who was a mixture. He was half man, half God. And putting the perspective onto the humanity of him, especially in this musical, makes him a much more relatable character and reaffirms that stance from the Bible that he is a blend of both. And just like humans, he has strong emotions. He gets angry, he gets frustrated, he's scared. A song that I feel like really stands out in this production specifically, though, is Trial by Pilate. I love the orchestrations here. I love the speed of it. There's a real panic tone that comes through in the direction and the way that they perform their song. As Pilate tries more and more and more to save Jesus, eventually being overwhelmed by that crowd, and bringing us into probably what is the most well-known song in this show, Superstar, which is performed very brutally in this production as we see Jesus dragged to the crucifix, while Judas sings this song of reflection. I think when you look at the music on its own, I think it's fantastic. While I don't think it always places into the show amazingly well, I think it is undeniably great. We now get to speak about what I feel is very unique to this production specifically. A lot of my discussions on this production have been more focused on the actual musical, which isn't overly changed. What is changed for this production is a lot of the direction and the design. I think on the whole, I'm a big fan. I love the kind of concert feel that they go with this. There's a lot of imagery with wires and mic stands, which I think really underlines the rocky feel of this musical. It complements it extremely well. We see loads of different tech parts used to form the crucifix. We see Judas's final moments being done with a hanging mic. When he's standing trial, Jesus is tied up with wires, with a mic kind of dangling down at the end of it, which he uses to sing into. A great representation of taking away some of that freedom as he really struggles to be able to sing and speak into this mic. There's some fantastic lighting choices in this show. I think it especially shines in a number like Gethsemane, where we see these great beams of light shine up and all point to one direction on the ceiling. Again, very rock concert-esque. It's not a word, but I've made it a word. Rock concert-esque, all one word. I do think within this direction, some of the moments aren't quite allowed to settle as well as I think they could. There's a very bold take on Gethsemane. It's Jesus in front of a mic stand, holding a guitar, and singing the song directly to the audience. Now, the thing about this direction, which when I was watching it, I wasn't overly a fan, because I feel like this song is the most important moment where you get to see how Jesus feels and really allows you to align with him. A lot of this musical spends its time on Judas's perspective, and this is the one time really where you get to sympathize with Jesus, which is so important with what happens next. And by doing a more Glastonbury performance of this, it kind of takes away a little bit of the emotion. But then it builds, and then he shows it more and more. As he sings it further and further, he gets angrier and angrier. The emotion starts to show, until, with the instrumental bit, he becomes so overwhelmed that he starts chucking things around. He breaks the mic stand, he throws it onto the ground, and then he curls up into a ball. It builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it flatlines, as it finally allows you to see the real fear of Jesus. However, I don't think that this moment where Jesus falls to the ground is long enough to really get that impact. It's very close. I think it's a moment that's so close to getting the intention, but I think it falls short by just a little bit. And all it needs is a slightly longer pause, elongating that moment. I think one of the most powerful tools on stage sometimes is silence or quiet, especially when we've had this complete build-up of emotions. To let it all out and all fall down in a moment is so impactful. So yeah, Did that completely work for me? No, but it is close, and I can see a lot of the ideas behind it. But for every moment like that, there's all of the imagery. I absolutely adore the main imagery of this show with Judas's hands. It's very Macbeth in that way. We constantly see him trying to scrape it off and it just won't come off. This mark, not only to the performer, but to the audience as well, of Judas's guilt, actually manifested into this stain that won't leave him. I also love the moment where this actually happens. You see a real hesitation for Judas to dip his hands into the silver paint. And it's actually Caiaphas that just really quickly forces his hands down, still showing that element of indecisiveness, not being quite sure if this is the path to go down, and quite literally having his hand forced. I also spoke briefly about the brutality of this, and I think a lot of that comes through this direction. A key moment is Trial by Pilate, where we get the 39 whippings, which only clicked to me in this production that 40 is such an important number in the Bible, and he does 39. So it's one off from that. And so the connections are connecting. Honestly, it's really weird. There are so many mentions of the number 40 in the Bible. Like, the key moment that comes to my mind is when he goes into the desert. He's there for 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah, I went to Catholic school. But that went way off track. In the 39 whippings, which build up more and more and more, we see an ensemble member throwing glitter at Jesus, leaving this absolute mark of just gold glitter all over him. But each one just adds an extra punch. Having that actual physical thing to be pelted at Jesus adds a lot of impact to this moment, alongside a great performance by Ian McIntosh, who really sells the absolute pain that Jesus is in this moment. I think there's a lot of really bold and intelligent direction behind this. While not every idea pays off amazingly well for me, when it does, oh my god, it does. And I feel like that's the element of this show where I do really respect it. It has bold ideas, it's trying different things, and when it works, it really strengthens the show. Now, choreography. I really like the idea behind the choreography here. It feels very cult-like in a way. There's a lot of really sharp movements. A lot of it is like very repetitive in a way. And a lot of the disciples would be covering their eyes, and it's very cult-like imagery, which goes to strengthening the idea of Judas seeing this as dangerous. By having this repetitive motions, by having these ideas that resonate with negative imagery in your brain, you immediately feel more inside with Judas, further justifying to the audience why Judas is so unsure. Having a person he loves lead something he believes in, but seeing the effects of that not quite lining up with those beliefs. The biggest problem with this, though, is the actual movement of this from an outdoor venue to a fairly big stage like the Barbican, and now touring that to slightly smaller stages. Because with the same amount of ensemble, this stage feels squashed. This is a hard thing to discuss because this is something that can change from venue to venue. If I saw this at a different regional theatre, this probably wouldn't be a problem. But on the stage that I saw it at, the new Wimbledon, a lot of this ensemble feels like it's a bit too big. There's too many people. And especially when most of the stage is taken up by the giant cross, there just isn't enough space for this choreography to flow. I think you can only judge a performance on the performance you see and on the venue you see. So I'm very interested to hear from anyone who saw this production in a different venue other than Wimbledon. Did you feel like there was enough space on that stage for these performers? Or did you also feel like it was a little bit squashed? I feel like had I had seen this production at the Barbican, for instance, this point would be null and void. Let's talk a little bit about the cast, and I'm going to start with Judas, played by Shem Amari James. As I said, I have some issues with the characterization with this version of Judas. I'll start, however, with the positives, which is that Shem's vocals are phenomenal. His performance of songs like Heaven on Their Minds, Superstar, Blood Money, his vocals are so strong, clear, powerful. He adds such a punch in. There's additional riffs. It's so beautiful. Vocally, I do not have a single problem. My problem, however, comes from the characterization of Judas here. I think that this show is one that hinges entirely on Judas, because you need to really understand why Judas is doing this. Jesus Christ Superstar, despite being called Jesus Christ Superstar, is all about Judas's conscience. It's about this moral quandary. Does he betray his friend despite feeling that is the right thing to do? It's all about that push and pull in Judas. And through Shem's portrayal, I didn't feel that push and pull. And I think that is probably the biggest reason why I didn't overly click with this production when I first watched it. Judas needs to be panicked. He needs to be conflicted. He needs that element of not quite knowing. And Shem's Judas feels very stern. He feels very decided already, which I think works against some of the great ideas in this show about Judas's conscience. There's so many moments within that direction that I've spoken about where you get that sense of going back and forth. But when the performer isn't really diving into that with the performance, there's only so far that can take you. And without that conflict, without that inner conflict that is so important to Judas's story, a lot of the point of Jesus Christ Superstar is lost. I'm not sure if this is a performance thing or a direction thing. Obviously, without having seen the production before, without having seen how the understudies perform it, I don't know whether this is something that the production is pushing or whether it's something that the actor is pushing. But for me personally, I think it's a very important element of the show that is sadly lost through this portrayal. And something that really stopped me from holding this production in much higher regard. Ian McIntosh, it took me a while to warm to his performance, but it's especially in Act 2 that he gets his moments to shine. The argument with Judas at the Last Supper, Gethsemane, he really manages to show a lot more of the humanity of Jesus. I think there are great supporting performances throughout the show as well. Hannah Richardson as Mary Magdalene really sells I Don't Know How to Love Him. And I really love, even in the moments in the background where she's standing and watching the trial with Peter, you feel the pain that she feels in these moments, watching a person she loves and respects be tortured. Jad Habchi and Matt Bateman as Caiaphas and Annas respectively are so cold and brutal. It's great. It's wonderful. And despite having smaller roles, there's a great impact from the performances of Pilate, played by Ryan O'Donnell, who really sells this panic and the confusion of why they are betraying Jesus. And, of course, the campness that is Herod, played wonderfully by Timo Tatsba. Jesus Christ Superstar is a good musical, a musical that I have a strong affinity for. I think it has some small structural issues here and there, but it is a musical that I think comes together especially within the end, with some fantastic music threaded throughout, and this production I think gets a lot right. I love the design elements. I love the thematic choices of using the concert staging. The mic stands, there's so many really interesting ideas here where they blend the imagery from the Bible with the imagery of a rock concert. I think this production misses out on some of the most key themes of this story, especially focusing it on Judas. But on the whole, I think it is a strong revival, and if you are a fan of Jesus Christ Superstar, if you enjoy the music, I think there is something to enjoy here. But what do you think? Have you seen this version of Jesus Christ Superstar, either at Regent's Park, the Barbican, or on its many UK tour stops? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out, helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on the screen right now, and a link to my Instagram if you want to drop me a follow over there. I also have other social links and a merch store in the description down below. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!